The Galactic Council had ruled over the known universe for 12,000 years, and they had never lost a war. 27 different alien species worked together under one banner, and they believed themselves to be the strongest force that ever existed in the galaxy. When they found Earth floating in the outer regions of space, they looked at humanity and saw nothing but weakness. Humans had only just learned how to travel faster than light, and their weapons seemed like toys compared to what the Council possessed. The Council sent 3 massive warships to Earth, and each ship was as large as a small moon with shields that no human weapon could penetrate, or so they thought. Admiral Richard Blake stood on the bridge of the Liberty watching the screens as the 3 alien vessels appeared in the sky above his home planet. He was a tall man with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many years of military service. Around him his crew worked in silence because they all knew what was coming. The aliens had not come to talk or to make friends. They had come to conquer, and everyone on the bridge understood this simple truth. The message came through every communication channel at once, and the voice belonged to Ambassador Zorath, who was one of the Council representatives. He was a reptile creature covered in scales that changed colors, and his voice sounded cold when he spoke to the humans below. The message was simple and brutal. Humanity had 3 choices, and none of them were good. They could surrender completely and become slaves to the Council, or they could leave Earth and go live on farming planets far away where the Council would use them as workers, or they could refuse both options and be destroyed. The Council gave humanity 72 hours to make their decision. Commander Lisa Hayes sat at her station with her hands shaking slightly as she listened to the alien ultimatum. She was young for her rank, with blonde hair tied back in a military style, and she had a daughter waiting for her back home in Colorado. She looked at Admiral Blake and asked him what they should do. Blake stared at the 3 warships hanging in space above Earth, and he thought about all the people down below who had no idea that their entire future was being decided right now. He thought about his own daughter playing in the parks of New Boston and living a life free from fear. He could not let the Council take that away. Blake told his communications officer to send a response to the aliens and ask for more time. He requested 1 week instead of 3 days, so that Earth's leaders could discuss the situation properly. The Council refused immediately, and their answer was harsh. 72 hours was all humanity would get, and not 1 second more. What the Council did not know was that humanity had been preparing for this exact moment ever since they built their first faster-than-light engine. The military leaders of Earth had studied every alien species they encountered in their early exploration missions, and they learned one important thing about the Galactic Council. The Council believed they could never be defeated, and this belief made them careless. Human generals and admirals saw this weakness, and they decided to use it against their future enemies. In secret locations all across the solar system, humanity had been building warships. Deep under the ice in Antarctica, massive factories worked day and night producing weapons and ammunition. In the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, huge shipyards constructed vessels that were designed for only one purpose, and that was war. Hidden behind the giant gas clouds of Jupiter, an entire fleet waited in the darkness ready to strike when the order came. The Council thought humanity had maybe a few hundred ships at most, but the truth was far different. Humanity had built thousands of warships, and they were all equipped with weapons that the Council had never seen. Before President Helen Carter spoke to the world from a secure bunker buried deep underground somewhere in North America, she was a strong woman who had led Earth through difficult times before, and now she faced the greatest challenge any human leader had ever confronted. Her speech was short and direct because she knew that long speeches would not help anyone right now. She did not tell the public about the hidden fleets or the secret weapons that Earth possessed. She did not mention the bases on Mars or the defense platforms floating in space disguised as simple satellites. She simply looked into the camera and said that humanity chooses freedom over slavery. The words were broadcast across every screen on Earth and up to the Council ships waiting above. Ambassador Zorath heard the message, and he responded within minutes. His reply was just as simple as the president's speech had been. He said that if humanity chooses freedom, then humanity chooses death. The Council began preparing for war immediately because they thought this would be an easy victory. Their war plans had worked on 1,000 different worlds before, and they saw no reason why Earth would be any different. First, they would bomb the planet from orbit and destroy all military bases. Then they would send ground troops to kill anyone who still resisted. Finally, they would sort through the survivors and decide who was useful and who should be eliminated. The Council had done this so many times that it had become routine. 50 Council warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel and appeared in orbit around Earth at dawn. War Master Krell commanded the fleet from his flagship, and he was confident that this battle would be over before lunchtime. He gave the order to charge all weapons and prepare to fire on the military installations below. His crew worked quickly because they wanted to finish this job and move on to their next assignment. But then something unexpected happened that made Krell pause and stare at his screens in confusion. From the dark side of the moon, 200 human warships suddenly powered up their engines and turned toward the Council fleet. From orbit around Earth, another 300 smaller vessels activated their weapons systems. From the asteroid belt far away, a group of massive battleships began accelerating toward Earth at speeds that seemed impossible. The Council had expected to find a small defense force that would be easily crushed, but instead they found themselves surrounded by a massive armada that had been hiding in the darkness, waiting for exactly this moment. Admiral Blake watched his tactical displays light up with friendly symbols as the trap closed around the Council fleet. Every ship was in position exactly as planned, and every captain knew their role in what was about to happen. Blake took a deep breath and gave the order that would change human history forever. He told every ship under his command to open fire and show the Council what happens when they threaten humanity's home. The Council fleet had expected this to be easy, but within the first 30 seconds of combat they realized they had made a terrible mistake. Captain John Peterson commanded a destroyer called the Defiance, and his ship was one of the first to open fire on the alien vessels. His crew had trained for 5 years in complete secrecy, running simulation after simulation, until they knew every weakness in Council ship design. Peterson gave the order, and his railguns fired tungsten rods at speeds close to the speed of light. The Council ships had powerful energy shields that could stop laser beams and plasma weapons without any trouble, but human engineers had discovered something important during their research. Energy shields were designed to disperse heat and redirect particle beams, but they were not built to stop solid objects moving at incredible speeds. The tungsten rods hit the first Council cruiser and punched straight through its shields like they were made of paper. The rod went through the hull and hit the ship's reactor core, causing an explosion that lit up the entire orbital space around Earth. War Master Krell watched his tactical display in complete shock as one of his cruisers simply vanished in a ball of fire. He could not understand what had just happened because Council shields were supposed to be unbreakable. His tactical officer started shouting about hull breaches and shield failures on multiple ships. Krell tried to give orders, but everything was happening too fast. 3 human destroyers focused all their weapons on his flagship, and his shields dropped from full power to 60% in just seconds. All across the battlefield, human ships attacked with a speed and aggression that the Council had never encountered before. Human captains flew their vessels in patterns that seemed suicidal by Council standards, but somehow they worked. Human crews fired their weapons until the barrels glowed red and then kept firing anyway. The smaller human ships darted between the massive Council warships like angry hornets stinging a bear that had stumbled into their nest. Commander Lisa Hayes had her own ship now after being promoted during the preparation period. She commanded a destroyer called the Valiant, and she led her squadron straight into the heart of the Council formation. Her orders were simple and direct. Find the command ships and kill them. She knew that Council tactics relied heavily on central coordination, and if the command structure fell apart, the entire fleet would become confused. The Valiant's sensors identified a Council battleship that was broadcasting command signals to the surrounding vessels. Hayes ordered her weapons officer to lock all missiles on that target. The officer hesitated for just a moment because the battleship was 10 times larger than the Valiant, and attacking it seemed like suicide. Hayes repeated her order in a voice that allowed no argument. The missiles launched and streaked across space, trailing fire behind them. The Council battleship's defensive systems shot down most of the missiles, but not all of them. 6 missiles got through and impacted against the ship's hull. The explosions ripped open the armor plating and exposed the interior corridors to the vacuum of space. Hundreds of Council crew members died instantly as the air rushed out into the void. The battleship began to list to one side as its engines failed, and then a human cruiser hit it with railgun fire that broke the massive vessel in half. Admiral Blake watched the battle unfold from the bridge of the Liberty, and he felt a grim satisfaction at what he was seeing. The Council had come here expecting an easy victory over a primitive species, but instead they were being torn apart by tactics and weapons they did not understand. Blake knew that every Council ship destroyed was one less threat to Earth and one more message to the galaxy that humanity would not be pushed around. The Council fleet tried to regroup and form a defensive perimeter, but the human ships would not give them any space to breathe. Whenever a Council vessel tried to pull back and repair its shields, a squadron of human fighters would swoop in and attack its engines. Whenever a Council battleship tried to coordinate a counterattack, human destroyers would target its communication arrays and cut it off from the rest of the fleet. Warmaster Krell realized that his fleet was losing, and he made the decision to retreat. He sent the signal for all ships to disengage and prepare for faster-than-light travel. But Admiral Blake had anticipated this move. Human ships had been positioned specifically to cut off all escape routes. When the Council vessels tried to accelerate away from Earth, they found human warships waiting for them at every exit vector. Lieutenant Kevin Morris was the communications officer on the Liberty, and he reported that the Council ships were attempting to flee. Admiral Blake's response was cold and final. He ordered all fleet elements to pursue and destroy every Council vessel. No survivors and no mercy. Blake knew that if even one Council ship escaped, it would report back about human capabilities and the Council would come prepared next time. This had to be a total victory, or it would mean nothing. The pursuit lasted for 3 more hours as human ships hunted down the fleeing Council vessels one by one. Some Council captains tried to fight back and managed to destroy a few human ships before they died. Others tried to surrender, but Blake's orders were clear, and the human fleet showed no quarter. By the time the battle ended, 47 Council warships had been reduced to floating debris and scrap metal. Earth had lost 98 ships during the battle, and 14,000 crew members had died defending their home. Each death hurt because humanity was still a small species compared to the vast populations of the Council races. But compared to what the Council had expected to do to Earth, this was an incredible victory. The Council had planned to kill billions and enslave the rest, but instead, they had lost an entire fleet. Blake sat in his command chair and looked at the final casualty reports. He thought about the crew members who would never go home, and the families who would receive news that their loved ones had died in combat. He knew that this war was far from over because the Council would not accept this defeat. They would gather their forces and come back with even more ships and even more weapons. But for now, Earth was safe, and humanity had proven something important to the galaxy. They had shown that advanced technology and ancient experience were not enough to guarantee victory. Sometimes determination and courage could overcome any advantage. Blake sent a message to all human ships congratulating them on their victory and reminding them to stay alert because the next battle would come soon. The Galactic Council gathered on their capital world called Throne Prime, and for the first time in 3,000 years the representatives felt genuine fear. They met in a massive chamber that could hold thousands of delegates, and the air was thick with anger and disbelief. Ambassador Zorith stood before the assembled leaders with his scales turning dark colors that indicated shame in his species. He had to explain how 50 warships crewed by the finest warriors in the galaxy had been destroyed by a species that the Council had dismissed as primitive. High Chancellor Vorthak was the oldest being in the chamber, and his species had been traveling between stars when most of the other races were still living in caves. He listened to Zorith's report with growing fury because the numbers did not make sense. How could humans who barely understood faster-than-light travel defeat a Council fleet that had conquered hundreds of worlds? Vorthak demanded answers, but Zorith had none that satisfied him. The debate in the Council chamber grew heated as different species argued about what to do next. Some wanted immediate revenge and called for the complete destruction of Earth and every human colony. Others urged caution and suggested that perhaps they had underestimated humanity's capabilities. A few delegates quietly wondered if maybe they should try to negotiate with the humans instead of fighting them. But these voices were quickly shouted down by the more aggressive members. Vorthak finally silenced everyone by standing up and speaking in a voice that commanded absolute attention. He declared that the Council would respond with overwhelming force that would leave no doubt about who ruled the galaxy. He proposed mobilizing 5,000 warships from across all Council territories. The fleet would travel to Earth and destroy not just the human military but the entire solar system. They would turn Earth's sun into a black hole and make sure that humanity's Fate became a warning story that would be told for the next 10,000 years. The vote was taken, and every single council member raised their hand in favor of total war. The decision was unanimous because no one wanted to appear weak or sympathetic to a species that had humiliated the council so badly. Orders went out across the galaxy, and thousands of warships began the long journey toward council space, where they would gather into the largest military force ever assembled. Meanwhile, on Earth, humanity was preparing for the inevitable counterattack. General Paul Hendricks coordinated the defense from a command center buried 3 miles beneath the city of Geneva. The center was a massive underground facility filled with computers and communication equipment that linked together every military installation in human space. Hendricks was a career soldier who had spent 40 years in uniform, and he knew that the next battle would make the first one look like a small skirmish. Colonel Susan Wright worked as the chief tactical analyst, and she spent her days studying the data collected from the destroyed council ships. Her team had recovered computers and weapons from the wreckage, and they were learning everything they could about council technology. Wright discovered that the council had been using the same basic ship designs for over 1,000 years because they never needed to innovate. When you win every battle, you stop thinking about how to improve. Hendricks asked Wright about the numbers and whether humanity could survive if the council sent their full military might against Earth. Wright was honest with him and said that humanity could not win a straight fight against 10,000 council warships. They simply did not have enough ships or enough people to match the council's numbers. But Wright also said that they did not need to win a straight fight, because wars were not won by the side with the most ships, but by the side that made the fewest mistakes. President Helen Carter joined their meeting through a secure hologram connection. She asked the general if Earth could survive what was coming, and Hendricks told her the truth. He said that the council would come with everything they had because their pride had been wounded. But he also said that humanity had advantages the council did not understand. Humans were used to being the underdog because throughout their history, they had faced extinction many times and always found a way to survive. Carter asked about the timeline, and Hendricks estimated 4 months before the council fleet arrived at Earth. He planned to use that time to prepare defenses and set traps that would turn the council's size against them. The bigger an army becomes, the harder it is to coordinate, and the more vulnerable it becomes to unconventional tactics. Hendricks intended to make the council pay for every mile of space they crossed. The president made a public address to every human in the solar system, and her message was broadcast across all frequencies. She told people that the council was coming, and that the next battle would decide humanity's future. She asked for volunteers, and within days millions of people signed up to serve in whatever capacity they could. Shipyards that normally built cargo vessels were converted to produce warships. Factories that made civilian goods switched to manufacturing weapons and ammunition. Every resource humanity possessed was directed toward one goal, and that was survival. Admiral Blake took command of the Second Fleet, which consisted of 800 warships newly constructed in the shipyards above Mars. His new flagship was called the Relentless, and it was bigger and better armed than the Liberty had been. Commander Lisa Hayes received a promotion and got her own squadron of destroyers to command. Captain John Peterson was given the task of training new crews and teaching them the lessons learned from the first battle. Across human-controlled space, the fleets dispersed and took up positions that would surprise the council when they arrived. Blake positioned his Second Fleet in the outer solar system near Neptune, where the council would not expect to find opposition. The First Fleet remained near Earth as an obvious target that would draw the council's attention. Smaller squadrons hid in the asteroid belt and behind the moons of Jupiter, ready to strike. When the moment came, human scientists worked around the clock to reverse engineer captured council technology and find ways to improve their own weapons. They discovered that council ships used a specific frequency for their shield generators, and human engineers built weapons specifically designed to disrupt those frequencies. They learned that council armor plating was strong against energy weapons, but weak against sustained kinetic bombardment. Every piece of information was shared across the entire military network so that every captain and every crew member knew exactly how to hurt the enemy. 4 months passed quickly as humanity prepared for the battle that would determine their fate. Everyone knew what was at stake, because if they lost this fight, there would be no third chance. The Council was coming with enough firepower to crack planets, and they intended to use it all on Earth and every human in space. The Council Armada arrived exactly 4 months and 6 days after the first battle, and they came in a formation that had never been defeated in galactic history. 3,000 capital ships formed a wall of steel and energy that stretched across millions of miles of space. 2,000 smaller vessels surrounded them, creating a screen that was supposed to be impenetrable. High Chancellor Vorthak himself commanded the fleet from a ship so massive it had its own gravity field and was called the Eternal. Dominion Vorthak stood on his command bridge surrounded by the greatest military minds from 27 different species. They had studied the battle reports from the first engagement, and they believed they understood how humanity had won. The humans had used surprise and unconventional tactics, but this time the Council was prepared. This time there would be no mistakes and no mercy. The tactical officer scanned Earth's solar system looking for the human fleet, but his instruments showed almost nothing. There were minimal defenses in orbit around Earth and only a few satellites that appeared to be for communication. It looked like humanity had abandoned their home world, or perhaps they had fled to their colonies hoping to escape the Council's wrath. Vorthak suspected a trap because he had not lived for 3 centuries by being foolish. He ordered the fleet to advance slowly with all sensors at maximum range. He wanted to know where every human ship was hiding before he committed to an attack. But even with all his caution, he could not detect what was coming. The human ships appeared in the middle of the Council formation without any warning. Not dozens or hundreds, but thousands of vessels that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. They had been waiting in a dimension that the Council did not know existed, using a modified faster-than-light drive that allowed them to hide just outside normal space. Human scientists had developed this technology by studying Council ships and then improving on the basic concepts in ways the Council had never imagined. Admiral Blake gave the order from the Relentless, and every human ship opened fire at the same moment. The Council fleet found itself under attack from inside its own formation, where their heavy weapons could not be used without hitting their own vessels. Human ships appeared at point-blank range and started tearing through Council cruisers like wolves attacking sheep. The battle was not a fight. It was slaughter. Human destroyers darted between the massive Council battleships, firing railguns that punched through shields and armor. Human cruisers launched thousands of missiles that overwhelmed point defense systems through sheer numbers. New weapons that had been reverse-engineered from captured Council technology cut through energy shields like they were nothing. Captain Ellen Price commanded a cruiser called the Independence, and she led 20 ships against a Council battle group that was trying to organize a defense. Her orders were simple, and she had trained her crew until they could execute complex maneuvers in their sleep. She told her weapons officer to target the enemy command ship and concentrate all fire on that single target. The Independence and her squadron fired every weapon they had at one Council cruiser. The enemy ship's shields flashed and sparked as they tried to absorb the incoming energy, but there was simply too much firepower focused on one point. The shields collapsed, and then the armor peeled away, and then the ship exploded from the inside as its reactors went critical. 3 more Council cruisers died in the next 30 seconds. Commander Lisa Hayes led her destroyer squadron on a suicide run against the Eternal Dominion itself. The massive super dreadnought was so large that it had trouble tracking small, fast-moving targets. Hayes knew this from the intelligence reports, and she intended to exploit this weakness. She ordered her squadron to get close and aim for the reactor, signatures that their sensors could detect. The Council's flagship tried to swat the destroyers away with point defense weapons, but the small ships were too fast and too maneuverable. Hayes watched her tactical display and waited until all 16 destroyers in her squadron were in position. Then she gave the order, and every ship fired at the exact same spot on the Eternal Dominion's shield. The concentrated firepower was too much for even the super dreadnought's powerful shields. The defensive barrier flickered and failed, and then tungsten penetrators traveling at relativistic speeds punched through the hull and found the reactor core. High Chancellor Vorthak had just enough time to realize that he had been wrong about everything before his ship exploded in a blast that could be seen from Earth. The death of the flagship sent shockwaves through the Council fleet. Ships that had been following orders suddenly had no one to give them commands. Captains who were used to fighting as part of a coordinated whole found themselves alone and surrounded by enemies. Some tried to fight back and managed to destroy a few human ships before they died. Others attempted to flee but found their escape routes blocked by human vessels that seemed to be everywhere at once. The battle lasted 9 hours, and when it ended, the space around Earth was filled with debris from thousands of destroyed ships. 4,736 Council vessels had been reduced to wreckage. 300,000 Council military personnel were dead. The greatest military force ever assembled in the history of the galaxy had been obliterated by a species that the Council had dismissed as primitives just months earlier. Humanity lost 800 ships in the engagement and 40,000 crew members died defending their home. Every single death was recorded, and every name was added to memorials that would be built across human space. The cost had been high, but the victory was total and complete. Admiral Blake sat in his command chair and looked at the tactical display that now showed only green symbols representing human ships. The red symbols that marked Council vessels were gone, except for a few scattered survivors that were already being hunted down. Blake opened a communication channel that would broadcast on all frequencies used by Council ships, and he knew his message would reach every corner of the galaxy. He identified himself and spoke in a calm, clear voice that carried the weight of 2 devastating victories. He said that humanity had not sought this war and had not asked to be part of the Council's empire. He explained that the Council had come to Earth and demanded surrender, but humanity had refused because free beings do not kneel to tyrants. He told the Council that if they came again, humanity would not stop at defense but would carry the war to Council worlds and show them what it meant to face an enemy that would never quit. The message was heard on Throne Prime and across every Council world. Species that had thought themselves the masters of the galaxy suddenly realized they were not invincible. The Council had been humbled, and humanity had announced itself as a new power that would not be ignored or dismissed. 6 months after the destruction of the Council Armada, a human diplomat named Gregory Martin walked into the Council chambers on Throne Prime as humanity's first official representative. He walked through doors that had been closed to his species just a year ago, and he walked not as a servant or a conquered people, but as an equal. The surviving Council members watched him enter, and their faces showed a mixture of fear and hatred, but none of them dared to challenge his right to be there, because humanity had earned its place through blood and fire. The Council chamber was enormous, with seats for thousands of delegates arranged in circular tiers that rose toward a domed ceiling. Martin walked to the center platform where speakers addressed the assembly, and he felt the weight of every alien eye upon him. He represented not just Earth, but every human colony and every person who had fought to remain free. He carried with him the memory of the 54,000 humans who had died in 2 battles defending their right to exist as a free species. Ambassador Zorath now held the position of acting High Chancellor because Forthak had died when his flagship exploded. Zorath looked older and more tired than he had during the first ultimatum, and his scales no longer shifted through bright colors. He spoke first, and his voice carried barely controlled anger when he asked Martin what humanity wanted after destroying 2 Council fleets and killing hundreds of thousands. Martin stood calmly and began to speak in a voice that was firm but not aggressive. He said that he had not come to gloat about victories or to threaten further violence. He explained that humanity wanted to propose a new relationship between humans and the species of the Council. He said that the war could have been avoided if the Council had approached Earth with respect instead of threats, and with offers of cooperation instead of demands for submission. Ambassador Krell, who represented one of the more warlike species, interrupted and called humans primitives who had only possessed faster than light travel for a few decades. He said that the Council had ruled the stars for thousands of years and had the right to determine how new species were integrated into galactic civilization. His words were met with murmurs of agreement from several other delegates who still believed that the Council's authority came from their age and power. Martin waited for the chamber to grow quiet again, and then he responded with words that had been carefully chosen by Admiral Blake and President Carter. He said that the Council's thousands of years of experience had not prevented them from underestimating humanity. He pointed out that age does not guarantee wisdom, and strength does not grant the right to rule over others. He reminded them that twice the Council had sent fleets to conquer Earth, and twice those fleets had been destroyed. The Council chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates shouted at Martin and at each other. Some called for his removal from the chamber, while others demanded that humanity be punished for its defiance. Martin stood quietly in the center of the chaos and waited for them to exhaust themselves. When the noise finally died down, he raised his hand and spoke again with even greater authority. He told the council that they had a choice to make, and that this choice would determine the future of the entire galaxy. They could accept that things had changed and acknowledge humanity as equals, or they could try to fight again. But Martin warned them that if there was a third battle, it would not be fought in Earth's orbit. He said that humanity had studied council tactics and reverse-engineered their technology, and improved upon it in ways the council could not imagine. He told them plainly that if they forced another war, the fighting would take place at council homeworlds, and humanity would bring the same fury to their planets that the council had tried to bring to Earth. The silence that followed was absolute and complete. Every delegate in the chamber understood that this was not an empty threat. Humanity had proven twice that they could back up their words with action. The council had sent 5,000 ships to destroy Earth, and all 5,000 had been turned into scrap metal. If humanity decided to go on the offensive, there was no guarantee that council worlds could defend themselves. Zorth asked what terms humanity was proposing, and his voice sounded weary, like he already knew that the council had no choice but to accept. Martin outlined the requirements that had been agreed upon by Earth's government and military leaders. Humanity wanted equal representation in the council, with the same rights and privileges as any other member species. They demanded an end to the practice of classifying species as servants or slaves. They called for open trade and cultural exchange between all species. They insisted on a mutual defense agreement that respected the sovereignty of every member. And they required a commitment to resolve future disputes through negotiation instead of force. The terms were fair and reasonable, but they represented a fundamental change in how the council operated. For thousands of years, the council had maintained order through the threat of overwhelming military force. Species joined because they had no choice, and they obeyed because rebellion meant extinction. Humanity was proposing a system based on mutual respect and voluntary cooperation, instead of fear and domination. The council debated for 3 days behind closed doors. Some species argued for continued resistance and claimed that accepting humanity's terms would make the council look weak. Others pointed out that they had already tried resistance twice, and it had cost them thousands of ships and hundreds of thousands of lives. A few delegates privately admitted that maybe humanity's way was better than the old system, but they were afraid to say so publicly. In the end, pragmatism won over pride. The council could not defeat humanity in battle, and continuing the war would only lead to more destruction. The vote was close, but it passed. Humanity was accepted as a full member of the Galactic Council, with all the rights and responsibilities that came with membership. 5 years later, the galaxy had changed in ways that few could have predicted. Admiral John Peterson commanded a joint task force of human and council ships that patrolled the Outer Rim, protecting trade routes from pirates. His second in command was an alien officer named Sekthor, who came from the same species as Zorth. The two officers had developed a mutual respect even though their peoples had been enemies just years before. Sekthor asked Peterson a question that had troubled him since the war ended. He wanted to know how humanity had developed such advanced tactics and weapons in such a short time. Peterson smiled and explained that throughout human history, his species had faced extinction many times from ice ages and diseases and wars among themselves. Humans survived by learning to adapt and innovate and never giving up even when victory seemed impossible. On Earth, monuments were built to honor the 54,000 humans who died defending their home world. Admiral Blake retired and spent his remaining years teaching at the new Interstellar Naval Academy. President Carter served 2 more terms, guiding humanity through its transition from an isolated species to a galactic power, and in shipyards above Earth and Mars and dozens of colony worlds, humanity continued building ships not for war but for exploration and discovery. The Council had expected humanity's surrender, and they had sent their armadas to enforce their will. What they received instead was a lesson that would echo through galactic history for thousands of years. Free beings will fight for their freedom, and underestimating their determination is the surest path to defeat.